Welcome to the Smith Publicity All Things Book Marketing Podcast, offering tips, insights, and advice from the best in the publishing industry.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of All Things Book Marketing. I'm your host, Olivia McCoy, and today we have special guest Reenita Hora, who is the CEO and chief storyteller of Chapter by Episode and has written 8 books of both fiction and nonfiction. Hi.
Hi, Olivia. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you. And congratulations. I heard your book, Operation Mom, just won 2 awards. That's so exciting. Which ones were they again?
Yes, that's very exciting. It's just won 2 book awards, the Eric Hoffer Book Award Grand Prize in Romance, and also the Chanticleer International Book Awards, also Grand Prize in the Chatelaine category for romance fiction. So I am beyond thrilled.
That's amazing. Those are some really impressive awards too. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. That story is on a bit of a roll, recently, because not only has it just won the 2 book awards, but I have actually already written a screenplay adaptation, which was a winner in the Santa Barbara International Screenplay Awards. So clearly there's interest in the story, which I'm very excited about in different ways, shapes, and forms.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
Thank you.
That's not the only thing you're working on either. You have a lot going on. So why don't you start?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So I do have quite a bit going on because I will do anything to go after and bring to audiences good story, compelling story. And so beyond being a book writer myself, and as you mentioned, I've written both nonfiction as well as fiction. I'm really trying to focus on my fiction now. Having said that, I've just about turned into one publisher, a literary nonfiction memoir of my late father. But the rest of what I'm trying to focus on book-wise is fiction. Mm-hmm. But I have been sort of a struggling author out there, not knowing the ropes, not knowing how to get started, get going. And then even once you get going, it's, not as easy as it perhaps appears to audiences. So I also have a publishing platform called Chapter by Episode, which I created initially as a digital platform. And that's what it is. It's an app. You can download it on the App Store, Apple, Google, whatever kind of phone you have.
Link below.
Link below. Okay, I love it. Thank you. Link below. And what Chapter by Episode does is it publishes what we call chat books. These are short books. This is genre fiction, so mystery, thriller, romance, paranormal, etc. Right? I call it pulp fiction for the digital age. And the way the stories are structured is they're not long form stories like you would read in a print book, but rather they look like chat conversations between you and me, character A, character B, me and my friend, right? Because on a phone, when you're looking at a phone, it's like, you could get a headache if you're reading all this, that's not the place to read beautiful descriptions. I mean, it's just too much. It's too overwhelming. So hence chat fiction. And what's sort of exciting about Chapter by Episode is it's on an app right now. It's an app. But we are actually, because we've had such a good reception, we're actually thinking of going into print publishing with the chat books to make them available possibly as digital and possibly even paper books as well. We haven't done that yet, but that's Chapter by Episode. A couple of more things I will mention is I am actively involved in audio stories, and this stems from my background as a longtime audio journalist, first on radio, then with podcasting. Along the way, I worked for digital podcasting companies, helping them, come to market and be acquired by larger players in the audio space. So I have two active podcasts. One is called the True Fiction Project, where I interview people with great stories. So here's Olivia. She's got a fascinating story about something. I will interview her, which is very much like this. And then I have a roster of fiction writers, one of whom will listen to that interview, pick up something from it, and create a fiction piece around it. I say piece, yeah, because it could be anything. It could be a monologue, it could be a scene, it could be a full-on short story, creative license. And then we audioify it, and the episode pieces together both the Q&A section as well as the fiction piece. So it really is a journey from unscripted to scripted, from nonfiction to fiction, to really explore where stories come from.
That is one of the coolest things I've ever heard of.
I am so glad you think so, because obviously I think so too. It's let's little narcissistic here about the ideas.
Not at all.
And I really wanted to give another platform to storytellers to create and bring their stories to audiences. I know firsthand how hard it is. So let's not be restricted by platform or just fiction. It could be audio also. We don't have to create a full-on audio book or podcast series to do so, but here is an opportunity, another opportunity for authors, and certainly for storytellers, meaning people, individuals, businesses, etc., to get, word out about what they do. And one more thing I will mention before I stop. This is a very long-winded answer to question.
No, please.
I wanted to mention Shadow Realm, which is my fantasy fiction story series, which is out as a narrative fiction podcast. I should say book one is out as a narrative fiction podcast. This is a very exciting, dynamic, young adult story series. It is a contemporary story, but it tied to the mythology of ancient India. So while there is quite a bit of fantasy fiction out there that ties to Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Celtic, etc., wonderful, wonderful stuff, there is little or nothing connected to ancient Indian mythology. And this has been, I'm not going to say, it started off perhaps being as an exercise for me to be a storyteller for my young kids. When I say young kids, they're now in their 20s. So it was a long time ago. But just one thing led to another, and I created this series. It's out as an audio series. The book still needs to be published. I'm working on that actively. I have a graphic novel version, and I have a screenplay adaptation, again, of book one, which is, it's attracted some interest. And I have a great event on June 8th at the New Media Film Festival, where I will be answering questions about Shadow Realm. So I'm going to stop there for a second, because I'm sure, you've got other things on the agenda.
Lots of follow-up questions on that, but everyone, links are below in the podcast episode description, so you can check it all out. Keep an eye out for that event, because it sounds like a really good time. But I'm glad you mentioned Shadow Realm and how you saw a lack of representation. You saw a hole that needed to be filled, and you decided to move forward with that. I would actually love for you to give us your opinions on what diversity currently looks like in the publishing space, both with books and authors, and maybe what it should look like in an ideal world, because I know it's something we're always working towards and thinking about, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, that is a great question, Olivia, and a very wide question. Well, the question is not wide, but the answer could be very wide.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of talk about diversity increasingly and of late. And even as I say that, in some ways, I feel like I've been saying that for a while. It's always, it always feels like, oh, now diversity is in. But it's not all untrue. There is a lot of talk about it, but in many, many ways, I feel that it's still a buzzword. It's a check the box item. It's a, if we can somehow, weave in diversity, then we are good, whoever we are. A story, a publishing company, authors that we represent, if, literary agents, and so on and so forth. It is hard to get truly diverse stories out there. I personally believe that diversity is not something that is just related to ethnicity and contained within the borders of America or the UK or any country, right? The reason I say that is because a lot of the stories that we will see here reflect the experiences of ethnic characters. And that is good. Don't get me wrong. That is very good, right? But to truly get into what is diverse, we need to explore perhaps the origins of these, or if not always explore, at least include. So if there is a story about a South Asian or reflects the South Asian experience or the African experience or, something in another world, right? That is also something that should be included in the book publishing or the publishing format here in the United States. The reason I say this is because I personally have had the experience, and I know that other authors have, that in bringing stories that are set outside of the US to US agents, publishers, and so on, be it print or audio, we have been met with a response that says, well, I don't know how we would bring in our audiences, maybe this is something for a publisher in another country. So that's something that is hard because, it sort of comes under the umbrella of diversity, but then are we really being diverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. The other thing is this whole issue of representation. And this is a bit of a catch-22. So for example, I wrote a kid's picture book very recently with my friend Erica. And it's a fictional book, but it is based on the themes of Diwali and Hanukkah. Now, Diwali is something I know, Hanukkah is something she knows. We bring this together. And we are talking about doing another story in which we wanted to have a Hindu character, a Muslim character, and a Jewish character. And I was talking with her and I'm like, Erica, okay, so let's do this. And she said, okay, but we've got to hold back because neither you nor I can write the Muslim character.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where it gets difficult for a person like me, yes and no. Okay, I personally am not Muslim, so I see where she's coming from. However, I have grown up in a country like India where, Muslims are 20%, if not more, of the population. And I have grown up in a city like Mumbai where I'm surrounded by people of all faiths. Some of my best friends that I've grown up with, the school system, my class, my class in school, that is, I have Muslim friends. So it's very much part of my environment. So why can I not write about those characters? And I have faced this situation with other authors also, perhaps, a Caucasian author here, but, she's lived in South America in one situation that I'm thinking of, in Africa, another situation with another author that I'm thinking of. Yet they have been told that they cannot write an African character or a South American character because they themselves are Caucasian. So this is a bit of a problem. And I don't really have an answer to it. And I don't know who does. But in an ideal world, what would diversity look like is that you can truly represent these other cultures, these other experiences, if you, at some level as an author, are an authority because you've lived there, because you've been immersed in it, because you've grown up in it, or, whatever the situation might be. A situation which makes sure that you as an author don't obviously misrepresent, right? That's important. Mm-hmm. And then from the publishing side, for publishers, agents, people who are bringing these stories to market, bring these stories to market. It's as important. One of the very interesting things I have found, even in the process of discovery with my own story, Operation Mom, that award-winning story we opened with, is this: the book is set in contemporary Mumbai, and it's comedy. One reviewer described it as, this is a young adult rom-com, which is more calm than rom. I like that. And as a friend of mine who works in the media industry in India rightly says, comedy is about conversation and dialogue and timing and, things like that, more than plot, like big plot. Of course, there are lots of comedies with great plots and big plots. But it's more about those other things, right? Which is why stand-up comedians, that's a whole different art form. The screenplay version of the story, the adaptation, is actually set in the US. So I did that intentionally, lots of reasons why. But what I found is that even though it's the same story, essentially, the characters and their experiences are now different. Mom is now an immigrant. She's been here 30 years, but her daughter is a first generation American. So even though she's ethnically South Asian, she's now more American than South Asian. So of course, there's all this disconnect between mom and daughter. So the style of the comedy has to change. The context changes, the jokes change, the situation changes. And that is important to recognize as well. So I just use that as an example because you can have the same story set in Mumbai or the same story set in Hoboken, New Jersey, but is it going to end up really being the same because the context is different? But it's still diversity, very diverse, South Asian characters in both, the same essential storyline, but things change. So I don't know whether that was just too complicated an answer.
No, I think we underestimate setting as a tool in literature and in writing in general. I think when we think diversity, when we think experiences and story, we think characters, we think connection, dialogue, but we don't think about how much setting has to play in that. And what stood out to me in that was you saying, we don't know how this would appeal to our audiences if the setting is not in the US. And I guess what came to my mind is, how does that make sense with all the fantasy and sci-fi fiction we have? Like, no one exists in reality in those spaces. Like, we're not currently living in space or on other planets or in these other dimensions. And so I think I see where they're coming from, but it's also short-sighted. There's so much in reading another experience and another place and another time that people are really interested in. And I think it's a missed opportunity a lot of the time. So it's unfortunate that that's been your experience in hearing that as well. But I'd love for you to talk more about what we as publishing professionals can do to invite that into the publishing space. What are things that readers and industry professionals can do to support diversity in publishing? Because we want to move towards that. I know we do as a community because it's been a trend for so long and it's come in different words: equity, inclusion, representation, own voices was a movement, diversity. So I know it's something that we are looking towards. We just haven't quite figured out how to really step forward and do that.
Yeah, it is a tough one. Readers are now more than ever before, I think, actively involved in demanding the kind of stories that they want. Demanding might be too much of a stretch of a word, but just at least putting their voice out as to what kind of stories they want. I think there is a huge opportunity with social media. I'm just going to point to TikTok of all of the platforms, that particular one, because it really, of all the platforms that I am on, even though I have actually a stronger meaning in terms of numbers, a stronger audience on perhaps Instagram or, Facebook or some of them, TikTok really has a very engaged story audience following, if you will, with Book Talk, Best of Book Talk, and so forth. People really, really want to know. So I think, and publishers are paying attention. Publishers are paying attention. So if these readers can actually express more, be more vocal about the kind of stories they want, then that message will get to publishers. I had just yesterday a really good conversation with a writer-editor friend of mine who, and we were talking about traditional publishing versus indie publishing. And traditional publishing has acknowledged in sort of recent times that they don't really know what they are doing, right? There is a small segment of stories and authors that do well or have done well, historically do well with traditional publishing, and sort of they ride on those. They publish other things but don't really promote them. And as a result, you've got a lot of really good story that just sits there, people's backlist, authors' backlists, just sitting there doing nothing. Indie publishing is one way to bring these stories to audiences. Again, it's not easy because that very notion of indie means you're small and strapped for cash, and it's, it can be expensive, and none of us in this industry seem to have any money. It's just like, I'm desperate to get my coffee and my toothpaste, and that's but one of the things that I think on the publishing side that really could be done is perhaps put out more submission calls, not just for diversity. That's almost, I hate to say it, a generic word, but specific subplots or sub-stories or sub-diversity angles within that. A great way to do that may be through contests. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yes, contests. I personally have had a lot of result with my stories for screen, not book, screen through contests. And my stories are all about the South Asian experience, whether they reflect the South Asian experience here in the US or outside meaning in South Asia, primarily South Asia, but South Asian diaspora. And they're getting picked up through contests because they are different, and people are seeing, well, this is a comedy or this is a fantasy, but it's got this distinct South Asian thread and characters and themes, and that's what makes it different. And I feel that if we as publishers could also do that, put out contest calls, there are so many storytellers, potential storytellers, wannabe storytellers out there who have stories to bring to audiences who could benefit from this. Even with other media. So for example, podcasting with the True Fiction Project, that's what I try and do, is identify really good stories or what is potential for really good stories so that we can then, help develop them. Now, I would love it if publishers would actually listen to some of the audio fiction that has come out of there, because again, it is fodder for an entire book or a play or a movie or a, graphic novel, whatever the case may be. And everybody is always looking for IP. We hear this all the time, but is it really true? They're looking for where are they looking?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I know agents all the time have requests for specifically what they're looking for, their agent wish list or their pitch wish list. So I see that all the time, especially on Twitter from agents that then lead to the traditional path, pitching editors and traditional publishers. Small publishers, you're right, I'm seeing a lot less of that. Although I will say I did see recently, I can't remember what publisher it was, but it was an indie publisher who put out a call they asked specifically for BIPOC vampire fiction, which I thought was really specific and niche and really cool. But I love what you just said about ask for submissions of short stories that you could then turn into a full novel. That's ingenious. That's amazing. So many people have short stories already written,
right?
And then you don't have to spend the time writing a novel that may or may not be picked up until that's genius. If I worked for a publisher, I would be pitching that straight to the top. I work for an agency, so it's different, but that's really a good idea. So hopefully people are listening, they're hearing that and can adapt it to business practices.
Absolutely. And it's also a way not to get stereotypical. What I mean by that is you mentioned manuscript wish list, which is a great, resource to sort of find agents and see what's on their wish list. But I often find, again, I'm speaking from personal experience, when I'm looking at those, and this is not a generic, everybody is different. So please let me not genericize. But I'll often find, because it's happened in not one or two or three, but many cases, it's like, give me an Indian story. I would love to have a South Asian story that is like Monsoon Wedding. And okay, why I bring up that particular example is because everybody loves the Indian wedding. I love them too. However, and I'm speaking for South Asia at large here, have so much more in the way of stories to bring to audiences than the Indian and the Pakistani and the Bhutanese wedding. They're lovely, don't get me wrong, but it is has become such a stereotype, you know. We have so much more to bring to audiences in the way of story, and the audiences themselves don't realize this, and the agents themselves don't realize this, because it's not even at a subconscious level. At a conscious level, they're putting this on their wish list. Oh, bring me the next Monsoon Wedding. And I love Monsoon Wedding, everybody does, but we need to get beyond that.
And, I was actually thinking, as you're talking about this, Nikita Gill comes to mind and Rupi Kaur come to mind, both of which are poets who write on South Asian experiences and immigrant experiences, and their lives in and outside of the US. And I was thinking about how, as publishing industry, we can take more from poetry. Like I say romance is leading the charge as far as book marketing goes, because they're so innovative as ways of promoting, but I think fiction poetry, is doing a really good job of finding their audience in the US for experiences and stories that didn't take place in the US. And I think that's something that we can look to and learn more from those audiences, reading those narratives, those pieces, on how to bring that into longer narrative formats.
I agree with you entirely, Olivia. And you've just mentioned two great examples of people who are doing exactly this. I think Rupi Kaur was just mentioned on the API list of one of the 100 most influential Asian American Pacific Islander community members or something like that. I'm getting the exact titling wrong, but she was on that list, and you can see her influence. You can see how she draws in her audiences. You can see how powerful she is. Same with Nikita Gill, right? And I agree with you. I think poetry really is a format, lyrical expression. Why are we reading, consuming, listening, because music is poetry, to such little of it? Why are we not using it more? And I think it's interesting. Again, I was on a panel at an authors conference last weekend. Poetry and music, lyrics of song are poetry. Right? So again, there needs to be, and there can be, and perhaps there should be, that word should, I get into trouble using that word should, but perhaps there could be more of a collaboration between musicians and poets to actually bring these stories again to reading, listening, consuming audiences, whatever the format is that they consume. I think there's huge scope.
Do you have any other authors you recommend, and why? And I guess I'm looking for authors or writers or artists that you see they're doing a really good job of making a space, finding the space, and succeeding in getting their messages, experiences out there.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so many, but a few that are a few of the lesser known ones first. One that comes to mind is Michelle Cox. She writes cozy mysteries, and that's a very specific, kind of story. But she does such a great job of not just the writing and the storytelling. Yes, that's fantastic, but also of commanding her audience. She literally spends a few hours of the day doing the actual writing, and the bulk of her day planning and acting on her marketing plan, and how to build and continue to serve her audience. I mean, she does such a great job of it, and really is someone that we could all learn from. Another one that comes to mind, Troy Lambert. Troy Lambert writes adventure, really fast-paced adventure series, like not necessarily fantasy, but I'm going to say adventure, action oriented. Wonderful writer, wonderful educator about that genre. You can find him at some of the top conferences. He's in Idaho, so he's also an orchestrator of the Idaho Writers Guild and their events, and very, very solid in terms of plotting and pacing and making sure that you outline your story before you write it or as you do it, to sort of make sure it doesn't just go and waft off into spaces that you hadn't planned. This is something that authors can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
The term we have, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Pantser means you just write by the seat of your pants and see where the story will go. And while that sounds romantic at some level, it can just lead you into dangerous territory where you're just writing and going nowhere with it.
I think we read the same article because I know that term. I know plotter, pantser.
Yeah. But Troy Lambert writes wonderful, wonderful stuff. And, he is a real example, somebody to look out for. Then there, of course, my favorite sort of South Asian, and it's hard to say my favorite because it's my favorite these days. It would be the right way to say it. Devi Laskar, Sonali Dev, they are South Asian authors. They are writing about the South Asian experience here in the US. They have written young adult, new adult, women's fiction, sort of, along, those lines. I love the work that they're doing. So definitely check them out. These are some of the authors that I love, are my favorites these days. It's always evolving. So I must say that these days. From an all-time standpoint, I'm just going to mention two of the funniest authors that, and there are more, but just these two I'll mention because I could just go on all day. We could just do, Anything, Ever, Always by David Sedaris. Anything, Ever, Always by Nora Ephron. I mean, Nora Ephron is somebody who could talk about her turkey neck or the junk in her purse and have an entire 7-page essay on it. Or talk, and it's just funny. One line, one paragraph is funnier than the last one. And at the end of it, it's like all she's been talking about is her neck or the things lost in her purse. I mean, and it's just amazing. And David Sedaris, I mean, has been such an inspiration for so many years, for so many reasons. Everybody knows him. I don't need to get into it.
Thank you for those. I'm gonna have to check some of those out. I know some of them. I know Nora Ephron, David Sedaris, some of those bigger ones, but I definitely will check out the others because now I'm curious. And then I'd love it if you could leave us with your number one piece of advice for writers out there looking to be published, and where our listeners can learn more about you and connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one piece of advice for writers who would like to be published, I would say plan. Don't be the pantser versus plotter, not just in terms of the book, the one book, but just your writing life, your goals as a writer, your goals as an author. I speak from the experience as somebody who started out being super naive about what it meant to be an author and a publisher, right? And I won't say that I have all the answers right now, but I have a whole lot more now than I did starting out. And a little bit, or a lot, but at least a little bit, not too much. Not too much thinking that it's going to detract from your creativity, but just enough thinking that you can plan out where you want to go with this. What is your own personal hero's journey? That the goals you want to achieve. So important to keep you on target. Do you want to be a full-time author? Do you want to be someone who does this on the side? Do you want to have that one book and say, oh, I published a book? And all are good, Nothing wrong with any of those paths. but planning goes a long way. For writers who want to be published, really, really consider who do you want to publish with. If you want to go the traditional way through agent and traditional publisher, that's fantastic. But know upfront that that could be a 5-year journey or more, or less, if you're lucky. But on average, for many people, do you want to go with an indie publisher? There are lots of really good, solid indie publishers, including chapter by episode, who are looking for your stories. So research them, reach out to them. Often they will take submissions that don't require an agent. Of course, the story has to be really good. It doesn't mean that, bad stories will be picked up by indie publishers, whatever. That's such a
And if
terrible...
you're having trouble with that research, I do know if you go first to a publicist or an agent, sometimes we can help you find the right indie publisher for you because we do have those relationships. So you can start building your team with the promotional expert and they'll help you get the production experts too.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yes. So indie publishers, yeah. And then there is definitely a case for the kind of author that wants to self-publish, especially if your book is nonfiction, especially if your book is self-help. And if you have a platform that, an audience platform, I should say, either that you already have or are building up for your self-help service. If you're a coach or if you're a mental health expert or if you're a nutritionist or whatever it might be, and you already have that audience, you already have that platform, there is definitely a case for writing and publishing your book yourself. Of course, you still need help with editors and designers and the team to get your book properly written, laid out, and published. But there is a case for sort of going out there and speaking to your audiences directly with your own work. So lots of different ways. I don't know if that confuses. I hope it doesn't.
No, it's great.
But genre fiction, folks, chapter by episode is waiting for you. True Fiction Project is here for you. Please send us your stories. I would love to see them.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olivia. And certainly to reach me, I forgot to mention. Yes. I'm on all socials. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, oh goodness, TikTok, Facebook, of course, LinkedIn, who's not on LinkedIn these days. My website, www.reenita.com is the place where you can go to find all of that. Subscribe to my newsletter where I can reach you directly. You can reach me directly, and I would love to be in touch with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And listeners, watchers, if you've enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it with anyone else that might be interested. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Smith Publicity All Things Book Marketing Podcast. To reach us and learn about our many services, visit smithpublicity.com or send us an email to info@smithpublicity.com.